Much, councillors. Report on the RPC meeting. I was going to hand this report over to Fenton, but he wasn't here for the whole time, so we probably should go through it. I will go through it. So most of this it wasn't really covered. We had some really interesting discussion around the Tuki plan change, and apart from that, when the quorum was broken, for all the good reasons, of course, the meeting was ended. So I don't think there's anything else to report on Regional Planning Committee.
And I'm happy to move, Chair.
You'll move. Oh, you're second, I'll move. You're second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Item 12, Napier Port IPO transaction update. Jess, are you going to just run through that? Everyone would have read it, so...
Maybe just run through the highlights. So this is an update from the Executive Steering Committee on the Port project. Port directors, the new Port directors, John Harvey and Vincent Tremaine, have been formally appointed and have commenced their duties. In terms of advisor appointments, Flagstaff was appointed as the independent commercial advisor, and since then the joint lead managers have been appointed and announced, those being Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Craigs. JLMs have commenced their work program, including a workshop at the port, and they will be providing advice to council through 2 planned workshops in March. In terms of the communications advisor, council has reappointed Jonathan Hill from Series 2 as our primary communications consultant for the remainder of the project. Due diligence continues at the port. The key role of the due diligence committee is to undertake extensive due diligence of the port from accounting and tax, and that will all flow through to the workshops that will be covered in March for council.
Who is the due diligence committee?
So there's the Executive Steering Committee is overseeing the Due Diligence Committee, which is comprised of the key advisors and staff at the port. So they're primarily focused on the internal due diligence and sort of the work streams internally at the port to get themselves ready.
There are some port directors on that as well.
Yeah, there are, yes, that's right.
Just to answer that a bit further, Tom, it's probably the most important committee that's there, really. There's the steering committee that's in charge, but the due diligence committee, they're responsible to understand the numbers and make sure the numbers are right. Because if anything goes wrong with anything like this, it'll come down to those kind of numbers. So it's really important that we've got the right people there, and I'm sure we have, to get all those numbers right, because those are the things that you and I and everybody else...
The numbers, though, that you're referring to are what?
How the port...
wharf costs? The wharf?
Oh, no.
Everything.
The finances of the port, everything.
It used to be called a prospectus. It's now called a
product disclosure statement.
It's the whole thing.
Yeah,
the whole
they are responsible at the end for that.
That's going to be right.
That's going to be really right. Mm-hmm. I'd just like to add to some of the comments that Jess. So I met the JLM team, and I have to say I was extremely impressed with them. That was the first time I had met them. Mostly I was impressed with their grasp of the situation, their understanding of councillors' objectives in terms of a local mandate. And they really got it, and they did exceed my expectations there in terms of variable schemes that they're wrapping around to make sure that it's successful. So I'm very confident that we are going to have a very good local participation, and I'm very pleased that they are focused on it. So just in case people think they're not, they are.
Well, Mr. Chair, the question I've got is how come we see the appearance of a due diligence committee here already formed, etc. So we've got previous engagement of full council in the process, and yet this is the first notion of due diligence committee that I've seen. Has it been raised before, or was it a part of the structure?
Yes, it has.
I'm pretty sure it has.
Yes.
Yep. as a part of the overarching
Yeah,
governance.
it's part of our legal advice.
No, but it has been raised that we had a steering committee, which is the overall control, due diligence committee, which is internal
No,
control.
I get that in terms of its apparition from this council.
I'm 99.9% sure it has been in previous briefings.
Because can't recall that structure.
Happy to bring that back to you in terms of what the governance structure looks like. We've got a diagram, I think, which explains it quite well. The inception of the DDC has been since the December in principle decision from council to proceed. I'm happy to circulate that governance structure back to council.
It doesn't come to mind as a part of the process.
Just an update in terms of the consultation on Holdco, the creation of a new CCO. So to date, we've had 4 submissions on that proposal. So early signs are that there's little interest, but still a week and a half to run on the consultation. So I'll bring you back an update at the close in terms of providing the
Still got a
submissions.
hearings date in our diary, I think.
Yes, we do, the 20th of March.
Because it reads differently, doesn't it? And I mean, in our diaries, it looked like the hearing had been canned.
It is back in, I think the 20th of March has been rearranged because we've got a couple of different workshops on that day and we've got a small session for hearings scheduled. So.
And the submitters are who? Who are the submitters?
Who are the 4 people who have submitted? I can't tell you off the top of my head.
There's 4.
But I'm happy to...
Individuals or?
Individuals to date, yes. Yeah.
Any more questions? Otherwise, do I have someone to move that we receive and note the transaction update? Peter? The seconder? Fenton? Thank you very much, Fenton. You just wish to speak? No. All those in favour? Aye. Passed. Thank you very much. Significant activities. Item 13.
Chair, we'll take answers to any questions you have in relation to those as best as we can with limited staff attendance.
Any questions? Fenton? And then
I had a few, Chair, just very quickly. Pre-feasibility assessment for groundwater replenishment scheme report expected by the end of February, i.e. in a day or 2.
Yep, so as far as I know, it hasn't arrived, but it was expected by the end of this week.
Thank you. Tutera, look, we're waiting for more information about the air curtain. It sort of has mixed outcomes. Obviously, the state of the lake is highly dependent on climatic conditions, etc., as we all know. Is there any previous data that we can compare against when they used to try and run the bubblers in there? The Ministry of Works had mechanised.
Look, we'll need to get Andy to provide you with some advice on that. Certainly, the bubblers have been successful in other locations around New Zealand and other circumstances.
Right.
One of the challenges is that it's improving some parameters at the same time degrading other parameters in terms of the water quality. So there's a whole balancing thing that Andy's trying to optimise with this, which is pretty challenging due to the unique characteristics of the lake itself.
Whakakī.
Can I add to that Andy's due to report back to the Tiwaio Tutera governance group in April, I think it is, with a recommendation about whether we look at going ahead with the bubbler in Tutera or not. And that's, keeping an open mind on that.
Thank you. Whakakī. We haven't had much luck planting manuka plants. The higher ground contours took, but it's a smaller area than anticipated. Got any idea how big that area is?
No, I don't, off the top of my head. Again, we'll provide that to you offline.
Mr. Mohi warning us about planting in wet areas. Hope we're not reinventing the wheel.
Wise old head. Predator-free Hawke's Bay, possum eradication, predator suppression, beginning at Napier. Are those contracts being let? Do we know? Oh, you won't know, see, probably.
No, I don't. I mean, I certainly we had 3 new staff on the project come on board in the last week or so the activity is certainly ramping up. There has been trapping contracts for the supply of traps let.
Can we have regular updates perhaps through ENS?
Yeah, sure.
And then the 2 new contracts for tender, Possum Maintenance Northern, I just was interested in where that may be. And the Waikato Moana Buffer Bait Station contract, be really interested where that actually sits, because it's got to buff a fair few.
So these are all questions probably best directed to Campbell Leckie. So
And
can
do you
I?
mind if I do that?
No, absolutely, please do.
And the last old staple, New Hawke River Road, you know, guys, it's going to rain soon and we'll have another winter gone. We'll have another group of grumpy cockies who were promised a road in October last year and they have nothing. So let's stop procrastinating and get on with it. It's not a super highway. It doesn't have a petrol station on it. It is a piece of road from here to that corner over there. That's it. Doesn't need to be over-engineered, in my humble opinion.
Yep, the only question is we don't want to throw good money after bad, so we want whatever.
We're not actually throwing much money at it.
Sorry, any money.
Yeah, well, look, I'm not so sure whether the final budget's all that clear at this point in time, but look, it is being worked on right now, so I understand.
Thank you. Last one, Chair. Cycle Networks, unless it's been misspelled, I can't see Waddle to featuring too highly in this. There is some proposed trails up there around the township that would not take too much to reinvigorate. I just wonder whether we could perhaps send a message back to the little governance group there that we do in fact exist up there.
I will pass that back.
Thank you.
There's always good representation from Wara on that governance group. There's normally a couple of people come down for it. Actually.
Thank you, Councillor. It's not panning out in action, though, is it?
Any other questions? Debbie, sorry. And then Tom.
I had a couple. Lake Hartuma and James, it's been suggested to me that there's significant sediment building up in the outflow. I don't know if that's correct or not, but I'm wondering if staff could advise, and if so, maybe there was significant funding through hotspots, maybe that could be addressed. My next question, and I had hoped to ask you in the E&S committee, but you weren't here for that report, so I'll pick it up under the CHB wastewater number 80, and just wonder if there was anything that you might like to add following on from discussions you may have had with CHBDC to inform this group a little bit more fully on what's going on down there, which seemed to be apparently lacking in the Environment Services Committee.
So, I have had discussions with CHBDC about the concerns expressed at the NS committee about the rate of progress with respect to the replacement. As has been put back to me, the District Council is equally frustrated at the time it is taking to get resolution. However, there are 2 kind of critical elements that they're seeking to achieve here. The first of which is developing a solution which is truly durable, and the observation was made to me that historically solutions have been put in place which have been quick to implement, but have not been sustainable in the longer term. So they want to get it right, so they're taking the extra time to ensure that the engineering advice is adequately peer-reviewed and tested, etc., so that the solution is robust. And the second thing is that there will be a significant cost increment here to the District Council ratepayer community, and therefore it is important that they have a strong community participation process in developing up the preferred option to take through to a long-term plan amendment process later this year, likely. So in my view, they are doing the appropriate things to get the ducks lined up so that we get a full and final solution to these issues, and I don't think there's any evidence of a lack of intention to resolve this as soon as practicable.
Would there be any objection to my attending meetings of the, whatever this group is?
I couldn't answer that. That would be a question we'd need to put to the District Council. At the moment, obviously, we have compliance staff involved in the process because this is subject to an enforcement action that resulted in a court order. And so we just obviously want to be clear that we're not mixing up our compliance and enforcement activity with our governance.
Even if I promise not to say a word?
But look, I don't have any objections to it, but that's something I want to square away with the District Council, so I'm happy to take that up with them.
I do think that what happens in that group affects the lower Tuki.
Sure.
Thank you.
Neil?
I have questions.
Oh, sorry, you have more?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Didn't signal yet.
The number two, the feedback, the pre-notification feedback. How is it going? I mean, we talk about meeting with Minister, meeting with the Crown, meeting with iwi authorities. Is this all progressing pretty smoothly, or any speed bumps?
None that have been brought to my attention, but Tom's gone, so I'm sorry I can't give you anything more definitive.
Okay. Number 5, the modeller who resigned, is this Pavel?
It is Pavel. Very sadly, he's been poached by, I think, the oil and gas sector and going off to Perth, and he will be extraordinarily difficult to replace.
Is that, are we far enough? I mean, we seem to churn through modelers. What impact will this have on our being able to advocate effectively around the tank process?
So the evidential basis for the tank plan change, particularly in terms of the groundwater model, is settled, and his manager, Jeff Smith, is sufficiently competent in representing that through the judicial processes around it. But look, we observe that modelers of this skill and capability are in massive demand internationally. We don't believe we can meet the market, frankly, salary-wise. So we have to play on the nature of the public good work we do and the lifestyle of Hawke's Bay. In Pavel's case, he has previously lived in Western Australia and has got friends and a community there. So he did right by us in terms of staying through to see the job done. But I think there was an inevitability around him moving on. So we are giving consideration to whether we're going to need to recruit somebody who's very junior in this area and grow them up over time.
Number 38, the Hawke estuary, the fencing that's reported there, is that being done on a voluntary basis?
In terms of the labour?
Well, I don't know. I mean, is there a rule that requires fencing of livestock, or is this being done on a... No, there's not. So the only catchment in the region that has a rule in relation to fencing livestock is the Tuki catchment at this point in time. The plan change that we try to trash at every opportunity.
Well, the issue we've got is that central government produced some draft regulations with mandatory stock exclusion under the last government. That was put on hold at the change of government. We've now been waiting some 14, 15 months for that to re-emerge from the Minister for the Environment. We understand that that's being worked on at the moment, and we would expect national regulations by the end of this year, which would override the need for a specific plan change ourselves.
Got it. Number 66 is my last one. The cycle network along Waimarama Road, awaiting on HDC before proceeding. What's the issue there?
Well, look, in order for that cycleway to be put through there, they need to designate this as road reserve, and so they've got a formal process to go through, and I think they're giving consideration to the community consultation issues associated with laying that new pathway. From our end, we're good to go, funding's available, and we're keen to get on with the job.
So in this case, it's their duty to assure community acceptance.
Well, I think in designating a road reserve, which is obviously a regulatory imposition, if you like, onto the land, notwithstanding the fact there is landowner agreement on it, it is something which they have to weigh in terms of how much consultation might be required with the broader community on it.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just in regard to the structure of this report, the question I've got is if we can go to item 36, which is under marine, described under freshwater improvement and project hotspots, marine, subtitle investigation, etc. My question is, is it possible to have identified coastal marine as a standalone, or at least a subgrouping of significant work stream?
Sure, no problems with that. We obviously had a marine work stream prior to the hotspots coming about. It got a funding boost as a result of the hotspots package, and so it's continued to be reported in here. But our marine activity is wider than the funding boost that got there. So I've got no objections to that.
It's possible that would help.
Yep.
And then further, Mr. Chair, just going to items 76 to 81, essentially. That's to do with, it's located under regulation group consents, and they're described as a project. I'm suggesting that, in fact, we fish out, excuse the pun, the stormwater, wastewater, etc. issues for Wairoa, Central Hawke's Bay, Napier, and I'd like to add Hastings in, put it in as a work stream on its own, either under regulation, but particularly in relation to your project approach, in fact, to cast some terms of reference, if you like, around the project. So we're clear on what the project is, who's doing it, and the extent and width and breadth of it. Is that possible to, number one, focus on those public water consenting compliance issues and planning? And number two is to, given that if it is accepted as a work stream, to put some terms of reference that we understand around it.
Look, certainly in terms of the compliance team, there is a dedicated work stream around territorial authority, Three Waters infrastructure, and to that extent I've got no problems with it being established as a project itself. I guess at the moment on the resource consent side of things, it's somewhat reactive to consents that come in the door, but bolting that onto the side of the ongoing compliance oversight of the existing consents shouldn't be problematic. So we'll take that away and have a look at it.
Thank you.
Rick.
Just want to follow up on the point that Tom raised about staff and shortages and the difficulty to recruit. You spoke about, in response, James, about getting some younger person to bring them through. Have you thought about looking for people here in Hawke's Bay who are committed to living here, who are very well qualified? I'm thinking of people to the level of doctorate level in sciences similar to what we would use here, and looking to them to recruit them on the basis that they would come and work for us, and some sort of arrangement over that they would stay for a period of time, and we undertook the cost of retraining them or giving them extra training. So I just think this would be a better strategy in finding someone coming through young who are looking maybe to move elsewhere. But there are a small group of people here who I'm aware of who are highly qualified, live here, love to live here, and are looking for work in this sort of area, but might not have the skills we want. Would we retrain them?
Happy to look at that. We'll have a discussion with the HR team about the possibilities of that. Look, from time to time we do get applications for roles where qualifications are broadly in the ballpark but not quite where we need them, and I think we are increasingly getting to a point where we're going to need to commit to investing in the retraining of some of these candidates. Otherwise we're just on a never-ending circuit of trying to find the perfect candidate.
Yeah. If you've got someone who's got a PhD, well then they're capable of doing a lot of work.
And before I go to Paul, I just want to assure you, Mr. Chair, I did not set him up to ask that question.
I want to assure you he did not either.
You did ask me a similar question.
Yeah, I did.
Really?
At our meeting yesterday.
Thank you, Chair. Number 18, we've got the Tikipo sub-catchment as a Fonterra 50 catchment. What's a Fonterra 50 catchment?
So a year or so back, Fonterra announced that they were going to provide funding for 50 catchment projects around New Zealand for particular focus on remediation of native vegetation, riparian planting, all those sorts of things. And there was a process they ran nationally to identify catchments. They have identified the Tukipo as one where they would like to make an investment. We've welcomed that, and I had a discussion with Andy Hicks about this the other day, in which he expressed great excitement about the possibility of bringing their funding to bear to create a substantial wetland for nitrogen collection and fixation in that catchment, and it may well be one of the key interventions that we can make in that catchment. What we'll be looking to do is, alongside their funding, putting a science program around it so we can ascertain its efficacy and if it indeed it makes a significant difference to nutrient and sediment overland flows into the water bodies in that catchment, then we may well look to scale that up across that catchment there.
Okay, so that was a project we hadn't anticipated to do, but we're getting but Fonterra's partnering with us to do that, so we're giving it a crack.
That's right. I mean, we're being opportunistic, really.
Are there any more questions, or can we have someone to move?
I'll move this one.
Thank you, Rick. Do we have a seconder? Peter? Okay, all those in favour that we receive and note these reports, thank you very much. Moved. Minor items. Now, Tom, you're first up.
Hawke's Bay Tourism, the board met a week or so ago, and it was pretty much business as usual. The only thing I would note is that I believe that the council is going to receive a letter from the chairman of that board regarding advocacy around funding alternatives, because there's two competing issues here. There's our council's desire to see some rapid ideas flowing forward as to what alternatives might be in front of us, and at the same time there are a couple of national exercises underway, local government New Zealand, the New Zealand tourism entity, etc., that are trying to approach those same issues on a nationwide basis, with a strong belief being that individual regions should not be trying to invent their own mousetraps to deal with some revenue capture. So in any event, that's been a subject that's been being talked about at the Hawke's Bay Tourism Board, and Annie is increasingly involved in some exercises like that to take a view and advocate a view to the national level. And there's probably a need for us to have some awareness at our level as to what the state of play is, and are those fast-moving trains, slow-moving trains, relative to our own budget cycling here. We're at the end of one fiscal year, basically, just about, and nothing has been brought forward on this issue to us by Hawke's Bay Tourism, and so they're aware of that, or we as a board are aware of that, but at the same time there's a lot of pressure to not move quickly and try to be part of a grander solution. So particularly with respect to, for example, the peer-to-peer rentals and all that sort of thing, or bed taxes, or other solutions of that sort. So anyway, because what I've suggested to them is that I think if they want and some of this gets complicated in turn by what our territorial authorities here in Hawke's Bay would like to see happen or not happen versus what the regional council might like to see happen or not happen. I guess the sense is there needs to be a little bit more transparency to what all these machinations are, so that, what I've said to them is, look, if you come back at the end of this fiscal year and say, well, we have nothing to suggest yet, there's going to be a reaction that, well, wait a minute, a year has gone by, what have you been doing? So they're feeling that angst is building up there. So anyway, that's just the state of play. And as I say, I would expect that George is probably going to send something to us saying, okay, guys, are you happy with the way we're proceeding here or not, so that we're not surprised if they come along 3 or 4 months from now and say, we don't have an answer. We don't have any alternatives to put forward to you. Anyway, that's state of play there.
Number 2.
Second, future farming initiative. We had a third meeting, I think it was, maybe third or fourth meeting a week or 2 ago also. And where that stands is with a fairly divergent set of players around that table, we have come up with a problem statement, a mission statement, a scope of activities that we think this entity and initiative should pursue going forward. There's been a view that we shouldn't go further than that substantively, that we should kind of just hand that over to the permanent entity as our charge, if you will. Here's what we think ought to be done. It's up to you guys now to figure out how to do it and what priorities amongst the different activities. That is all being rendered in a write-up of the minutes and so forth. So that's all going to be circulated to all of us, I guess, as soon as the staff gets the paperwork done. And the group itself is moving on now to the structural questions. What is the permanent form that this is going to take, and how would that be populated? I mean, what's the appointment process for creating the ongoing entity, with our expectation that all of those issues will be covered off in the next couple of meetings that we have scheduled between now and May. So that process is moving along quite nicely, I think, and as I said, it's a pretty wide spectrum of folks. Ben, would you add anything to?
Only it's interesting that we sort of settled on a fairly succinct set of measures, etc., or certainly a decent package to hand on to the subsequent group, and we should be in a place to set about establishing that before the end of this council financial year.
So I think there'll be a report brought to the next E&S committee on all of this.
Thank you both of you for that. Whakatū Arterial.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I represented the council at the opening of the Whakatū Arterial Route, or Tiara Kahikatea, as it's been named. And I'd just like to note that, 27 million, this is the biggest roading project since the construction of the expressway. And I do have to congratulate Hastings District Council for the job, bringing it through on time and under budget, and for operating a very effective, inclusive community planning process to establish the route, avoiding the acquisition of Maori land. And that contrasts quite clearly with the ill-fated Northern Arterial project.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, it's a pretty awesome piece of road, all right, no doubt about it. I'm sorry I couldn't make it. Okay, I had the last one, Waitangi Park. I reported some time ago that Peter and I had visited Waitangi Park accidentally, really. We visited another thing next to it. But we were quite very impressed and quite overwhelmed, really. It's an impressive piece of work that is continuing to happen there. So we have set up a bit of a visit. It's on Monday the 18th at 1 o'clock. I'm sorry that time won't suit everyone, but it was the only time that James and I could do it, and our parks people. So anyone who wants to come is very welcome, and we're going to have a look at the existing park and go and have a look at the new lake and the new wetlands that have been set up there. So get that date?
What's the date?
Hey, March.
March.
Right.
The
Monday, March the 18th at 1 o'clock.
An invitation to be sent out.
Hopefully coastal
Yeah,
hazards.
we'll get an invitation sent out, just if you're available and around. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. That is the end of our meeting. I need someone, we have some issues to discuss. I need someone to move us in the public excluded.
I'll move it going to public excluded.
Moved and second.
To include Blair O'Keefe
And we'll include Blair
and Nick Cornwall.
and Nick Cornwall.
Yep, to include Blair O'Keefe and Nick Cornwall.
Yeah. All those in favour? Aye. You now move into public exclusion. Thank you very much.